to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
The Urban Fae Troupe of the High Fairy, Part 2. This journey was one that we could make with the artificial portal that any High Fae could cast. Grandmother Fithit instructed me on the process, and I helped her make the one that the Gaelic Western Wolf Clan would use tonight. It was better than helping her make cookies. On our arrival, we were greeted by an awe-inspiring sight. Okay, sight is an inadequate word. Observation might be better. To encounter the High Court of the Powers of Darkness was to experience. Yeah, that's the word. With all the senses at once, and with each highly tuned. Despite all that I had undergone over the past year, I was all but overwhelmed by the sensations, as though it was the first time I generally encountered the Fae. Poor Juan and Maria must have nearly fainted. It was stark and ornate all at once, dark with connotations of hard-held decisions, destruction, and death, but with the aim to make way for life. While many High Fae denizens of Otherworld possessed a flair for the dramatic, likely because immortality could get boring over the long haul, none of them looked silly or displayed less than absolute sincerity in their appearance, bearing, and demeanor. They were akin to the absolute best examples of everyone and everything you've ever seen or heard, smelled, felt, or tasted. Only better. They were the essence of each of those sensory experiences. The spirit of all. I wasn't sure I would ever feel like a part of them. I didn't deem myself worthy. I was behind all of the prominent guests as we entered the hall that was constructed of great stones, but the only roof was the stars that glittered cold above. The pillar stones looked rough-hewn, yet each included carvings of breathtaking scenes from more cultures than there were stars visible above. Within the great circle, I glanced around to all sides. The thing was an amalgamation of Stonehenge, Gulbiteke, Baalbek, Pumapunku, and some more recently discovered ancient megalith sites, yet clearly designed and built by higher intelligence, with the soul of artists and poets. It was what the first great minds and true powers had constructed, the highest technology blended with the natural wonders of a living world. It was, in essence, Otherworld. At least, a half of its essence. I'd never been a hardcore duelist, nor were many Fae, yet this place was true darkness. Not evil. That was a mundane concept, at least as a noun. As a verb, it was quite active in any world. This place was all that gave terror to the night, and at the same time, all that lent beauty and softness to gloom. I was enamored of it at once. My elder family members had warned me that my grief would draw me to it, but I hadn't realized how strong a pull it would exert, except on this night. There was a great feast with food and beverages beyond counting. There were ceremonies and announcements from a pageantry that I won't try to describe. It had to be experienced in whole. I was disturbed when I heard a minor announcement among the final few delivered. The great powers had decided that there would be no feud beyond the level of realms. Ours against Serpente, and that any volunteers were to enter with the understanding that they were reavers, raiders, or warriors, with a fight-only status and no additional or further feuds, would attach to the current conflict, and volunteers had 9 days left to join. I wonder whether that would put paid to our assistance from the Kitsune clan and Shabil. At least in Otherworld, under Fae law, many atrocities could be committed in Mundania, if not the Otherworld affiliate worlds. Laws and rules get all twisted, as with everything Fae. The instructors were a decree, the essential nature of laws and rules, very malleable or even fluid. Eventually, the formal session of the High Court broke up, and it was announced that until midnight, when the troupe began, there would be a ball. Any formal grievances or other business would be conducted tomorrow. I had plenty, but my elders assured me that they were too minor to be presented to the High Fae courts. It was enough that our feud had even merited mention. I agreed. I wanted to settle my affairs on my own. Well, with my army at my back. I noted that the Mactirmor had slipped from my side. Then I spied him. He was embraced in an elegant dance with my other grandmother, the great witch Sophronia. They gazed lovingly into one another's eyes and were clearly lost to any other thoughts. I wanted to roll my eyes and say, gross, but they were just too beautiful a couple to make anyone feel that way. Not in this place. I once more felt wonder that these two people who looked so young and vibrant were my grandparents. I turned to express the thought to Sorsha. Another layer of stone encircled my heart. I had no interest in dancing and wished only to be back at Caer Mactir, planning our next move. We'd done that already, but each battle caused us to have to shift the plans. I felt a tug at my elbow. It was the sweet raven. Come, grandson. It is expected that all dance at least once. You may note that the tempo tends to be more stately than of the frantic pace of Beltane. You may enjoy it just as much if you will allow yourself to do so. I told Juan and Maria to wait. They hadn't spoken a word since we'd arrived. They just stood aside, their backs to the enormous stone pillar that towered above before it merged with its capstone, mouths and eyes agape in wonder. It was their job to serve, but I'd poured them each a large goblet of some intoxicating beverage to keep them busy. Before I knew what had happened, I'd been swept out onto the dance floor, followed by the most poignant strains of music that had ever graced an ear. The dance was like floating, and I wished only for the woman I held to be my Sorsha. The Fithik Mil understood. She was probably thinking the same with regard to her Griffin Prince, my true grandfather. She kept our dance simple in comparison with the intricate steps that so many other couples and groups and individuals, there's several different configurations of dancers employed, moving with the notes that almost seemed to appear in the air to dance along with us. Eventually the tune ran its course. I kissed my lady's hand, and she left to attend on her mistress for a short time. I returned to my designated wallflower space just in time as it happened. Serpente had approached Juan and Maria and had them backed into a corner of sorts. He was flanked by a being much like himself, and a jaguar warrior, maybe a chieftain. They loomed large beside their master, yet he was the one that projected true menace. I was about to light into the trio when my grandmothers and surviving grandfather arrived. The tableau froze for a short time. Then Serpente, teeth and fangs glittering, smiled. Wolfling, just the being for whom I'd searched. Such fortunate timing. He did not say that it was good fortune, nor for whom it might be good. I decided to play, despite the feeling that I was far outmatched. My timing has been fortunate of late. For what purpose do you seek me? I just insulted him for his losses on the battlefield, and at the same time informed him that I really didn't want to make time for his taunts and verbal escapades. The smile sharpened. I must congratulate your timing. I only wish to determine the status of your, well, whatever she was to you, the red-haired girl. Is she well? I had to bite down my rage, and he knew he'd scored. But I managed a decent enough reply, as well as one could expect. Lady Sorcia is alive and regains her health, even as we speak. He was already far ahead on points when he delivered his primary verbal assault. I understand that you met my friend Stark Farm. I hope that he will visit me in Mundania one day. He doesn't care to visit the pyramids. Fire drakes and Quetzaldragons are natural enemies. If only you'd known that he was in his father's old lair, the one which your parents and those of your girl invaded, in which they murdered his father. 3 Varmstorm's murderers were already dead, and it was I who gave Stark Farm revenge on the last of his sire's tormentors, the Gosling. It was how we bonded. Serpentine chuckled. You think that a mere Fear-Garrick could have destroyed a warrior of his abilities? Even you, as weak as you are, nearly defeated it. Of course, a small band of inept warriors managed to defeat the great Barmstrom, so miracles occur on occasion. He paused for drama, and to ensure that his insult had landed. It had not, so he went on with his cartoon villain reveal. My Kelpie was the primary cause of the Gosling's death. It lured him out of his puzzle house in the first place, while he struggled against the Fear Dragal and was distracted. My water demon destroyed him and dined on his fresh corpse. It is I who am the author of your grief and that of your redhead. I have no idea how I managed to hold back my feelings. I think most of them were penned inside the stone enclosure in my chest. I was also saved by my tendency to fight, even when the match was only verbal. Thank you for telling me. I wondered about that. Mr. G was hardly weak or inept in my eyes, especially after I found out how genuinely powerful he must have been. I appreciate all the information you have provided. It will assist in my upcoming endeavors, I'm sure. I stepped up close to him. Oh, you'll know when those begin. I patted him on his shoulder like he was a dog called to heel and stalked past him, my own mien stiff like a canine. Nope-a-loopin'. He'd beaten me on points, but I'd caused him to expose more, and my petty physical gesture at the end would send him apoplectic. A victory with a loss. Once again, he would not be able to taunt me at a more critical moment because he had unleashed his nastiest trump card too early. I really needed to get him some comic books so that he would learn that villains deliver their exposition during battles, to give away to the hero a solution for kicking their whatever the comic book villain had as a caboose. He shouldn't have given me exposition during a random encounter in a non-action environment. It would allow me to defeat him without a big final battle. Once we'd moved Juan and Maria to a safe distance, I rounded on the happy couple, my paternal grandparents. Thank you for supporting me. Your very presence helped me ensure that I was able to hold my temper. I was being sarcastic to Sophronia, but genuine to the big bad wolf. I gave my maternal grandmother a nod bow. My lady, you were the cooling breeze that kept my temper from bursting into flame. The sweet raven smiled in her beatic manner. You are most welcome, but you should not be surprised. After all, we promised. I'm only glad I looked back before I reached my destination. She looked meaningfully at Tyree, who grinned and nodded. Sophronia patted my back, much as I had done to Serpente. We have our own struggles, my dear, but I haven't murdered anyone who truly mattered to you. I've done only the bidding of my mistress, in my own way. I stepped aside from her touch, as I would from a venomous, stinging insect. Was your minion not present when the fire drake Starkvarm murdered your child, my father? I was getting steamed again, stone cold heart or no. Of course not. I can only imagine what you must suspect, but if Siobhan was there, it was her own volition. Perhaps directed from above, but maybe of her own volition. The glamour on her run its course by then. I would never harm my son, no matter how much he hurt me. I'm afraid that we've gotten off to a mistrustful start, my red wolf. Can you imagine Tyree remaining on loving terms with me had I committed such an atrocity? It was the first time I've ever heard her speak in what I considered sincere tones. I realized that there was still more to learn, and that I was out of my depth as usual. I was saved by the ringing of bells and the clamor of musical instruments of a staggering variety. The announcement came, "It is time to begin the troupe." Grandma Raven excused herself. She had yet to get back to her mistress's court. As I watched her go, I noted Tom's slinking form passing in her wake. He looked over his shoulder and gave me a wink. I had more support than I knew. As we joined the queue, I saw Lady Kitsune Redi approach from among the leaders of her clan. We bowed to one another, and I greeted her. "My lady, it is good to see you well and prospering. We cannot thank you enough for what you and your folk accomplished in the last conflict. It made a great difference, and was a surprise to our foes as we had hoped." She displayed her enigmatic smile. "It is how we agreed, no more or less." I was aggrieved to hear of the grave injuries to Lady Sorsha. She was indeed courageous in her actions and succor to you in your extremes. It seems that the Starkvarm is determined to exterminate both your families with the help of Serpente and his Wet's-a-Dragon. He has not won. She lives, and where there is life, there is hope. After another nod bow, she parted to keep up with her folk. Another friend, Roar, approached and introduced his wife, Grith. They walked with us a while, and once he promised to aid us in any way he could, he assured me that he and his folk were prepared for the next action. In fact, many more of them had volunteered their services. It was welcome news. The Gnomon were very powerful and wise. A figure of similar build, but taller and broader through the shoulders, with a more cunning look on his features, approached while we spoke. Rorar introduced him as Svartand, the dwarfen folk. They were relatives of the Gnomon from a northern world. I wasn't sure how direction worked in Otherworld. I knew that they were at least in 4 dimensions, but I recognized a dwarf from the Norse sagas when I saw one. "Thank you, Mr. Tolkien." We bow and clasp forearms. "I hear that one of your guards, a wolf named Aduel Silverfoot, took on a nearly grown fire drake and delayed it from burning and devouring your party." He spoke in clear admiration of the feat. There wasn't a hint of irony, yet he also paid no heed to what my feelings on the subject might be. It might have been glorious to behold. My people are particular enemies of that breed. They like to steal treasure, which is something we hoard. We make things from it, but they simply keep it. Oh, they may spread some of their put-together more misery for their enemies, but they likewise just like to keep it like the old misers they are at heart. I suppose it's just their nature. But when nature collides, feuds occur. On that score, I will be accompanying your next venture with a company of my folk. Rorar here will make the arrangements when the time comes. Well met, Red Wolf." With that, he strolled off to his own place in the line of march. Rorar looked up at me and shrugged. "It's how they are. Many do not like the dwarves because of their frank and direct language and manner. However, they are ferocious in battle and harder to kill than most beings. They are clever and wily, and the weapons they make are superior to all." I shrugged in return. Beings are as they are. I liked him. As son Mundania would say, there was no BS in him. Then I had to break down what BS was and why it meant what it did. He chuckled and asserted that he had discovered a new favorite slang term. We proceeded through a variety of realms in a variety of worlds. It seemed that time, the fourth dimension, was suspended for the troupe of the High Fae. It probably was. Many of those present were genuine powers, not mere High Fae. During the march, Arthur Mayle passed us, on his way to pay regards to a local being of his long acquaintance. The golden wee folk still buzzed around his head like a crown. He grinned at us as he passed, as the moment tromping along on all fours. I realized then that I had seen something very akin to him in a museum one time. It was in an exhibit of megafauna from some long ago epoch. The short-faced bear. He wasn't an exact match. He was even bigger. And, of course, he had thumbs and wore pouches and all. But there was a definite family resemblance. Perhaps they were to him what mortal anthros were to me and my immediate kin. Distant, lesser relations. The poor relations swimming in the shallow end of the family gene pool. The Mactir Moore gazed at me. He may have been angry about my tiff with Sophronia. Neither had spoken during the earlier part of the march. She had returned to the retinue of her mistress, the witch queen Caradin. It was, after all, their night. He didn't look mad or happy, maybe a little worried. "Rob, I know you are grieving, but Sorsha lives. You are acting as though she is dead, and that is unhealthy for both of you. She will need your strength to recover. I will go even better for her when we triumph. We can only do that with your focus. Tonight I led, but after tomorrow, it is back on both of us. You must steel yourself to withstand the weight." "I understand, Grandfather. I genuinely did. It was just the stress of the evening which had lessened as we encountered each of our friends and allies. I am in a much better frame of mind than when we set out on the troop. We've encountered friends, and despite my loss in the verbal match, I am confident that we can beat or at least curtail Serpente's plot in Mundania. It will be focused. We just have to get past 3 a.m. in both O time and M time. I'm wondering what we shall see when we troop through the city." He grinned his wolfish grin. "We're about to find out. I think you will be interested, if not happy, with the first beings we met." He was right. We passed through a major portal, one that left Arthur Mayle's world and realm, and entered Mundania. It only took a moment for me to gain my bearings. I stared up at Fulshire Tower from an angle that was unfamiliar, but I would never forget that edifice. I looked around at the heavy vegetation and realized that we had arrived, not at, but on the mound. It truly was a bend of nature and technology, a place of worlds. A tall figure loomed in the street between the two major structures. It was surrounded by shadowy forms that possessed gleaming eyes, and from which the glints of natural weapons reflected the wan light available. It was Lord of the Hunt. His minions sent up their usual cacophony of hooves, hard feet, claws, and the baying of hounds in greeting. Any mundane who may have heard would have registered only normal nighttime sounds of ambiance traffic and barking dogs. Grandfather was right. I wasn't sure of my feelings, but I was interested in what might happen. In the end, I decided that if he in any way drew near, I would simply be polite and respectful as when we parted last year. I hoped that he would stay with his peers at the front of the line, but naturally he stood and watched, like a pedestrian perusing a parade. As our continuance passed, he looked down at me. I gave up and stopped. I turned towards him and bowed. "Hail, great lord of the hunt! Your pack is fed before dawn this year?" "Greetings, child," he said in that rumble of many voices as one. "The hunt was satisfying this year, but the prey was, after all, only mundane. An accomplished athlete for one of them, but no match for any of ours. I placed a wager on you in your current endeavors. The odds are long, and I will win a great prize." He leaned forward menacingly, as only he could. "Do not disappoint me." He leaned back and laughed. The most menacing sound I'd ever heard. Not that it would matter. You'd be dead. No way for me to harm you then. I shuddered and resumed the march. We didn't have much further to go. We reached Centennial Park and the big Crossroads Plaza. The last stop before returning to the High Court of Dark Powers was our otherworld realm. The big bad wolf barked out a laugh and slapped my shoulder. "I think he likes you." I knew whom he meant. It's a rare thing for him to joke in a manner that is easy for us to comprehend. His humor tends to be his own and typically involves blood sport. I wonder what he wagered and with whom. I shrugged. What could such a being hold as valuable? If he even made a wager at all, maybe it was part of his joke. Grandfather shook his head. He may have been joking, but he never lies. Besides, there are things to bet other than wealth, in the way that you are thinking. Likely it is a life or a set of circumstances that he wants to influence, that other party wishes to influence towards a different path. I suppose we'll find out soon, if we live. He barked out another laugh. His own humor was pretty strange and bloody-minded at times. I, of course, approved. To get where we were going, we passed the strip of land in our realm that led to the crossroads, and then followed the road into Serpentay's world and realm. My hopes of peeling off and heading home were dashed. The guardian of the crossroads stood out front of his fortress and bayed joyfully in greeting. The nighttime gloom on the landscape was hard to penetrate, but I noted that the forts along the border had been repaired. Granted, it was only the next day, but they were not even temporary fixes. I imagined that many of the denizens would be nocturnal, but I recalled that Serpentay's kind preferred the light of day for their activities. I still treaded lightly and expected to step on a viper at any moment. The night grew quiet, and the troop slowed as they surveyed the damage. When we reached the pyramid, they slowed even more. Juan and Maria drew in close behind me and trembled in terror. Neither of them would look up at the structure. I couldn't really blame them, but terror for myself was not a consideration for the moment. I saw that the minor damage we'd done had already been repaired. This had been the focus of any available artisans and laborers. The top was open, and when it had disregarded the great "What's a dragon?" I wanted with all my stone heart to climb up there and try and throw a spear down its throat just before it roasted me alive. It was an irrational thought, but it stirred my feelings and cracked the stone just a bit. A beam of near-blinding ultraviolet light emerged from within the building and rose to illuminate the night sky. It was so hot that we could feel it as we passed. A few high fae and great beings approached the beam and lit torches from it. We were near the end of our trek. The last stage was the great bonfire at the High Court. It would be followed by a dirge sung for the death of the year. I expected at any moment for the beam to turn downward and fry me, but it faded in intensity, and slowly the glow and the heat reduced until all was darkness. Only the spots from the blinding light danced in our eyes. The bonfire ceremony was very different from the one at Beltane. That one had started the festivities. This one ended them. It was mercifully short, and as soon as we set out for home, the long way, around Serpente's realm, though he'd publicly offered passage to any beings who journeyed such a road, would shorten. He looked me directly in the eyes when he made the assurance. He was likely playing games, and I was tempted just to play some of my own, but the decision was not mine. I was only there as a vassal and heir to the big bad wolf, and he in turn to the Gaelic Western Wolf King, in whose train we would travel. I would still have preferred the shortcut. "Let's old Snake Eyes make a move," I seethed. We had an entire Wolf King's guard, and we could annihilate them. It was simply not going to happen. Kings had greater concerns than whatever I was. Individually, I was true Fae, maybe even high Fae when reckoning bloodlines. Still, I had no official title or position beyond temporary warband leader. So I continued to seethe. Serpente's a punk. How did he whip me so easily at verbal sparring? That had never happened to me. It was a common game amongst hood rats, and I was the local champion. He had actual physical battle victories to tout. That was the clear answer. Far more than the few skirmishes we'd won. Besides, I was terribly distracted once again with worry for my Sorsha. Was she indeed still mine, now that she was no longer an anthro? Did that matter? Of course it did, but I felt so wrong for feeling so certain. I decided that perhaps it was best to seek for more deeds rather than for more words, to fill my mind with required concentration and keep the stone wall intact. But those dragons, we had to figure out a way to stop them. That was a good distracting thought, at least related to the action. Maybe Tyree would know enough lore to offer ideas on their weaknesses. Like so many dark powers, they seemed jealous of one another. Grandpa Tyree said his goodbyes to Grandma Sophronia. He couldn't stomach that and turned away to speak with my little band. I heard the elder cupper murmur something about seeing one another soon. Gross. They looked young and gorgeous, but it was gross again. No grand ballroom to alleviate the nausea. She was not only my grandmother, but a witch, after all. A hot witch? I had to completely shut down my mind for a moment to cleanse that wandering synapses. Not my fault, I promise. No mortal from Mundania ever had a grandmother that looked like either of mine. It just wasn't natural. At least that's what my years in that world had taught me to believe. Our chariots awaited us at the breakup of the party, along with the wains for the rest of the retinue, and we climbed aboard with weary feet. I looked over at the Mactyr Moor. So, any idea how to get the Quetzal Dragon and the Fire Drake into the same room and let them duke it out? He processed my syllogisms and pondered the actual question. I'm not sure that would work. For one thing, it's too obvious. For another, we don't know if it's true until we reach the library. Finally, the enemy of their enemy will likely be their friends, at least until the battle is over. We wouldn't want to be around to see who the victor was in such a contest. The Quetzal dragon, in this instance, is larger than the fire drake, at least in length, but it would be a near even match, I think. I nodded. Yeah, probably a pipe dream. No idea how to pull off such a stunt. Sure, it would be fun, though, if nothing else. I'd enjoy seeing the smirk wiped off Slithery Joe's mug. I had to pause and explain idioms. He often complained about them, but I think Grandpa liked to learn even useless esoteric nonsense. In this case, he got a kick out of Slithery Joe and grinned. We will need to rest and then plan, then rest some more. Are you sure about attacking again so soon? Our forces took some damage. We may need to spend some time rebuilding and training. I considered for a moment, happy to have tactical and strategic matters to fill my consciousness. It should be soon. Most of the training we would do would be on the fights we've already had, and I think we should try to anticipate what will come in the future. I have an idea, though, if you don't mind a little side trip, and the potential for messing up our good clothes. He shook his head. You know that we cannot break the peace ban. The raid at Beltane pushed the low past breaking point, but if we match it, we'll be the ones who suffer. It always seems that way. I gave him my version of the wolfish grin. Oh, come on, Papa, where's your sense of adventure? Besides, I wasn't thinking of anything to do with Fae or Otherworld, at least not directly. Just visiting a widow woman in her lovely ramshackle mansion, and then paying a visit to some old friends of a lost friend. He thought for a moment and then nodded. We have to bid farewell to our king, who has already helped us twice. We sped ahead to the front of the train. It seemed that the Gaelic Western Wolf King had anticipated our coming. He knew our plans as far as he wished, which was his right. He was a great Fae and different from lesser beings. It was the same as with the Griffin Royals. They resembled the folk, only more so. I was technically high Fae, but I wasn't about to make any assertions on the point. My personal attitude fit well with the meritocracy of Otherworld, at least the parts of which I was party. I know, it gets complicated. The king gazed down at the Mactyr Moor. I was only a retainer of the High Lord, not worthy of the royal gaze. Detaching before we reach your care. My grandfather bowed to his liege. Such is our request, my king. I would leave my retinue with your train if I may. The Wolf King gaped a grin and nodded. It was hard to tell his true form. He looked for one moment like a young anthro with shaggy hair, and the next like the same but with a wolfish head. I liked him and was glad he was my king. He unexpectedly peered at me for a moment. I was taken aback and with no better course decided to bow. My king. So, you've decided to serve me? He asked it as a question, but clearly already knew the answer. I have, my liege. I looked him in the eyes when I said it. Bows were respectful greetings among our kind, but to keep performing them after the initial greeting made a being appear obsequious or groveling. True Fae, who rightfully feared high Fae, great Fae and great powers, knew better. They did not typically favor sycophants. There were exceptions, especially among the dark powers, but wolves, even dark wolves, favored the bold. I accept, and will call upon you at need. He paused briefly, as long as it does not interfere with your allegiance to the Griffin. At my look of consternation, he barked out a booming laugh. It is normal with our kind, especially with younglings who are as yet unfamiliar with how serious we take such matters. Besides, I like the Griffin Royals. Take care of your old and enfeebled grandfather on tonight's venture. You may find that it leads to unexpected places." With that, we were dismissed. With that, I noted that the big bad wolf rode his chariot with a swelled chest and shoulders thrown back in a display of pride. I realized that the king accepting my service reflected well on our branch of the clan. I may, mind you, despite the stone that encased my heart, have puffed a little myself. So quoth this raven. And my darlings, there is more to come. Bear has assured me he is working right now on more chapters. Have a lovely weekend, my darlings. Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.